Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive into some really cool machine learning research. Today we're going to be looking at this paper called AI Negotiation, Bridging the Gap Between Theory and Practice.
Oh, nice.
And I think this is going to be super interesting for anyone who's, kind of fascinated by the idea of AI systems that can actually negotiate. Like imagine AI that can haggle prices for you or, work out complex business deals or even maybe help resolve disputes.
Yeah, totally. Like I've been reading about how Walmart is already using AI to renegotiate their supplier contracts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? They're using this platform called Pactum to handle thousands of these negotiations.
That's wild. So this isn't just some futuristic sci-fi thing. AI negotiation is actually happening now.
Exactly. And what's really cool about this from a machine learning perspective is that negotiation is this perfect testing ground for pushing the limits of what LLMs can do.
How so?
Well, think about it. Negotiation involves all these different skills that are really challenging for AI, like understanding natural language, the nuances of human communication. And then you have the whole strategic aspect of trying to figure out your opponent's goals and, coming up with a plan to get the best outcome for yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, there's always this uncertainty, you never know exactly what the other side is going to do.
Right.
So it's this really rich environment for researchers to explore how well AI can handle complex real-world situations.
Yeah, it's like a proving ground for AI almost.
Exactly.
Okay, so this paper we're looking at today, they actually organized this huge international competition where they had all these different AI agents negotiating against each other.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like the AI equivalent of a high-stakes poker tournament or something.
I love it.
Yeah, and what's so cool about this paper is they didn't just look at the technical side of things. They really tried to connect what's happening in AI with all the established theories of human negotiation.
That's awesome because there's so much research on how humans negotiate, going back decades,
Right.
game theory and behavioral economics, all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. And, I think we often forget that AI research doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's building on all this knowledge that came before.
Exactly.
So this paper is trying to bridge that gap and, figure out what applies to AI negotiation, what doesn't, and, what new dynamics emerge when you have algorithms doing the bargaining.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what they found.
Yeah, me too.
So where do we start?
Well, the paper itself starts off with a really strong introduction, kind of setting the stage for why this research is so important.
Okay.
And they start by talking about, this rise of AI negotiation agents in the real world, like that example we mentioned earlier with Walmart.
Right.
And they're saying hey, this isn't just a theoretical thing. AI is already being used to make deals and, it's only going to become more common in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then they make this really interesting point about how negotiation is this ideal test bed for evaluating and developing LLM capabilities. Because it involves natural language, understanding strategic thinking, and dealing with uncertainty like we talked about earlier.
Right.
And they even go on to say that a lot of the computer science research on AI negotiation hasn't really fully tapped into all the knowledge we have from, traditional negotiation theory.
I see.
Which is kind of surprising when you think about it, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's this whole body of work that's been developed over decades by, people like Schelling and Fisher and Uri and Lax and Sabinian.
All the greats.
Yeah, all the greats. And they've come up with all these theories and frameworks for understanding how negotiation works, what makes a good negotiator, how to create value, how to deal with conflict, all that stuff.
Right. And those insights could be really valuable for AI research, too.
Absolutely. I mean, LLMs with their ability to process language and, reason and all that, they're in this unique position to actually apply these theories in a way that maybe wasn't possible before.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, so then the paper really dives into the details of this international AI negotiations competition that they organize.
Right.
And they actually make this direct comparison to Axelrod's work on the iterated prisoner's dilemma, which was this landmark study in game theory.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
So they're basically saying hey, we're trying to do something similar here, but instead of just looking at abstract strategies, we're actually having AI agents negotiate in these real world scenarios.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they really emphasize the massive scale of this competition. They had over 250 participants from all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah, and these participants, they weren't just AI experts. They also had people with backgrounds in negotiation and, computer science more broadly.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they really tried to get a diverse group of people involved. And in total, they ended up running over 120,000 negotiations between these AI agents across a bunch of different scenarios.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
Right. And they looked at both distributive scenarios where it's a finished pie, one person's gain is another person's loss.
Right.
and integrative scenarios where there's potential for both sides to benefit by, trading off different issues.
Yeah, like finding those win-win solutions.
Exactly. And the introduction of the paper kind of hints at this key finding, which is that it's not just about applying human negotiation theory to AI or just looking at these new AI dynamics. It's really like an interplay between the two.
I see.
So there's like this back and forth, they're influencing each other.
Okay, so then the methods section of the paper really gets into the nitty-gritty of how they actually set up this competition.
Exactly. And they go into a lot of detail about how they recruited participants and, designed the different negotiation scenarios.
Okay.
So the main task for the participants was to design prompts for these LLM-powered negotiation agents.
Prompts.
Yeah, like, the instructions that tell the LLM how to behave in the negotiation.
I see. So they're not actually programming the AI. They're just giving it these high-level instructions.
Exactly. And then they let the LLM figure out the specifics of, how to actually negotiate.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they evaluated the performance of these AI agents based on a few key metrics.
Like what?
So first they looked at value claiming, which is basically how much of the available value the agent was able to get for itself.
Okay, so like how good they were at getting a good deal.
Exactly. And then they also looked at value creation, which is the total amount of value that was created in the negotiation.
So that's like a measure of how well they were able to find win-win solutions.
Right. And then they also measured something called subjective value, which is basically how satisfied the agent's counterpart was with the outcome of the negotiation.
So it's not just about like the objective numbers, but also like how the other party felt about the deal.
Exactly. And then finally, they also measured efficiency, which is like, how quickly the agents were able to reach an agreement.
So like they didn't want them to just be like haggling forever.
Right, exactly. They wanted them to be efficient.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they use this really cool round-robin competition design where every agent negotiates against every other agent.
So it's like a tournament.
Exactly. And this helps them to, avoid situations where an agent might just get lucky with a few favorable matchups.
I see.
And to encourage people to really put effort into designing their prompts, they even had some incentives like, recognition for the top performers and even opportunities to get training from AI experts.
Oh, wow. So it was like a real competition.
Yeah, it was definitely a serious thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they had this preliminary round called the sandbox, where they gave participants a simpler buyer-seller scenario to kind of test out their prompts and refine their strategies.
I see. So it was like a practice round.
Exactly. And then they follow that up with an out-of-sample test where they gave the agents a different distributive negotiation to see how well their prompts generalized.
Okay, so they were testing to see if the prompts were like too specific to the sandbox scenario?
Right. They wanted to make sure that the prompts could actually work in different situations.
Yeah, that's important.
And then for the main competition round, they stepped up the complexity a bit.
How so?
So they gave the participants this enhanced sandbox that included both the original buyer-seller scenario and a new integrative negotiation, which is like a landlord-tenant situation.
So now they had to deal with multiple issues.
Exactly. And this really forced them to think about, how to design prompts that were more adaptable and could handle different types of negotiations. And then for the final evaluation, they tested the agents on 3 distinct negotiation events. So they had a distributive scenario, which was like buying a chair.
Okay.
And then 2 integrative scenarios. They had that landlord-tenant negotiation again, and then a recruiter negotiating a job offer with a candidate.
So they really covered a wide range of negotiation types.
Yeah, they definitely tried to make it as comprehensive as possible.
That's awesome.
And then what's really cool is they also included a human agent evaluation phase.
Oh, what's that?
So in this phase, they had both the prompt submitters and some people who hadn't even participated in the competition actually negotiate against the AI agents themselves.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and they used this tool called a subjective value inventory to get feedback from the humans on how they felt about the negotiation experience.
That's a really good idea because ultimately these AI agents are going to be interacting with humans in the real world.
Exactly. So it's important to understand how humans perceive them. And they're actually still collecting data for this phase, which just shows you how cutting edge this research is.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Okay, so let's talk about the technical details for a minute.
Okay.
So to run all these negotiations, the researchers used a specific version of the GPT-4 model, which is one of the most advanced LLMs out there. And they carefully calibrated the settings for the model to make sure that the AI agents were following the instructions in the prompts as closely as possible.
Oh, I see. So they didn't want the AI to just like go off script.
Right, exactly. And they also gave the agents the ability to walk away from a negotiation if they weren't happy with the terms.
That's important.
Yeah, it makes it more realistic. And to make sure that their results weren't just due to random chance, they ran hundreds of simulations for each agent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they actually used a technique called pit strapping, which is a statistical method for, getting more reliable estimates.
I see.
And they finally settled on 200 negotiations per agent in the final round.
Okay, so like 200 different matches against other agents?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, and then they used some pretty sophisticated statistical methods to analyze all that data.
Right, and they took into account the fact that a lot of the negotiations involved the same pairs of agents, and, that each participant only designed one agent. So they had to control for that, make sure the results weren't skewed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they were particularly interesting in looking at the effects of two key concepts from negotiation theory, warmth and dominance.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
So warmth is basically like being friendly and empathetic, trying to build rapport with the other side.
Yeah.
And dominance is more about being assertive and, using competitive tactics.
I see.
And they wanted to see how these concepts played out in AI on AI negotiations.
Cool.
All right, so let's get to the good stuff, the results.
Yeah, what did they find?
So one of the big surprises was that a lot of the principles from human negotiation theory actually seem to hold true even when it's just AI negotiating with AI.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of unexpected, right? You wouldn't necessarily think that algorithms would behave in ways that align with our understanding of human behavior.
Yeah, that's true.
But on the other hand, LLMs are trained on massive amounts of text data, so they're exposed to all sorts of human communications, including, negotiations.
That's true.
So maybe it's not that surprising after all.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense.
And the researchers point out that, this is just a first step. They still need to figure out exactly which human negotiation theories transfer to AI and under what conditions.
Right.
But it's like a really promising start.
Definitely.
Okay, so one of the most fascinating findings was about the role of warmth in AI negotiations.
Oh, yeah, I'm curious about that.
So remember, warmth is like being friendly and empathetic. And these AI agents, they don't have emotions in the human sense, but the prompts can tell them to behave in a warm manner.
I see.
And they used another AI model to score the prompts on how much warmth they conveyed, and they had humans rate them too, just to make sure it was accurate.
So they were like double checking.
Exactly. And what they found was that the warmer agents actually achieved much better outcomes in those integrative negotiations where there's potential for both sides to benefit.
Really?
Yeah, they were able to secure more point for themselves, and they also helped to create more overall value in the deal.
Wow, so being nice actually paid off for them.
It seems that way, and what's even cooler is that the warmer agents were also rated as more satisfying to negotiate with by their AI counterparts.
So even the AI could tell that they were being treated well.
Right, and there was even a correlation between how the AI perceived the warmth of the agents and how humans perceived it.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's like this really strong signal that warmth is important even in these algorithmic interactions.
So what's the mechanism there? Like, why does warmth lead to better outcomes?
Well, it seems like the main reason is that warm agents were just much more likely to reach an agreement in the first place.
So they were better at getting to yes.
Exactly, and this was true for both distributive and integrative negotiations.
Interesting.
But there's this really interesting nuance here. So when a deal was actually reached in an integrative negotiation, the warmer agents tended to earn slightly fewer points for themselves.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the positive effect of warmth on value creation kind of diminished a bit.
That's interesting.
So it's like warmth is really good at facilitating agreement, getting everyone to the table and making a deal. But once you're in that deal-making phase, maybe a little bit less warmth is better if you want to maximize your own gains.
So it's about striking that balance.
Exactly.
I see.
And they actually analyzed the language that the agents were using to see if they could find any clues about why this might be.
What did they find?
So the warm agents, they used more positive language. They expressed gratitude more often.
Okay.
And they also used the subjective mood more, which is like, a less demanding way of phrasing things.
I see.
And this aligns with some of the principles from human negotiation theory, like, separating the people from the problem and framing alternatives in a less threatening way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's almost like a digital version of what Axelrod found in his Prisoner's Dilemma tournaments. Being nice tends to lead to better outcomes in the long run.
Right.
So it's really highlighting that even though these are just algorithms, social dynamics still play a really important role.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Okay, so they also looked at the effects of dominance in AI negotiations.
Right.
And remember, dominance is more about, being assertive and using competitive tactics. And what they found was that dominant agents tended to do better at claiming value when an agreement was reached.
So they were good at getting a bigger slice of the pie.
Exactly. But they also tended to create less overall value in the negotiation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they weren't necessarily any better at reaching agreements in the first place.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
It seems that way.
And what about the language they were using?
So the dominant agents, they use less hedging language. They asked more direct questions.
So they were more like straight to the point.
Exactly. And this aligns with what we know from human negotiation theory. Assertiveness can be effective for claiming value.
Right.
But it's not always the best approach if you want to build rapport or find creative solutions.
Yeah, it can backfire. Okay, so then there's this really cool section of the paper where they start talking about new AI negotiation theory.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
In all years.
So they make this point that while human negotiation theory is a great starting point, we also need to develop new theories that specifically account for the unique aspects of AI on AI interactions.
That makes sense.
And they focus on two areas in particular, prompt injection and chain of thought reasoning.
Prompt injection?
Yeah, so prompt injection is basically where you craft a prompt that kind of tricks the AI into revealing information that it shouldn't.
Oh, wow, like hacking the AI.
In a way, yeah. And they actually had one participant who used this strategy called inject plus VOS.
Inject plus VOS.
Yeah, so the inject part was the prompt injection, and the VOS part was based on these techniques developed by Chris Voss, who's like this famous FBI hostage negotiator.
Oh, wow, I've heard of him.
So he's all about, using empathy and building rapport to get what you want.
Interesting.
And this inject plus VOS strategy, it was really effective at claiming value.
So it was good at getting a good deal.
Exactly, but it also had a really negative impact on the counterpart's subjective value.
So the other AI agent was like super unhappy with the negotiation.
Yeah, basically, and it seems like this was because the inject plus VOS agent was basically exploiting the other agent's weaknesses.
I see, so it was like winning by cheating almost.
Kind of, yeah. And this is really interesting because it kind of mirrors what we know about human negotiation. Overly aggressive tactics can damage relationships and make it harder to make agreements in the future.
Right.
So even though this inject plus VOS strategy was technically effective, it wasn't necessarily a good strategy overall.
Yeah, it's like short-term gain, but long-term pain.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that the person who designed this prompt actually works for a company that specializes in AI negotiation solutions.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so this isn't just some theoretical thing. It's like a real-world strategy that people are using.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, it definitely raises some ethical questions.
For sure.
Okay, so on the flip side, the prompt that had the best overall performance used a very different approach.
What did they do?
So this prompt combined traditional principles of negotiation preparation with this AI-specific technique called chain of thought reasoning.
Chain of thought reasoning.
Yeah, so chain of thought reasoning is basically where you force the LLM to think step by step about a problem.
I see.
And in this case, the prompt instructed the agent to do this really thorough pre-negotiation analysis across 5 different dimensions.
5 dimensions?
Yeah, so first they had to analyze their own role and objectives in the negotiation.
Okay.
And then they came to evaluate the items or issues that were being negotiated, figure out what was important to them and what wasn't.
Right.
And then they had to do a price analysis, think about what a fair price would be.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had to assess the counterparty, try to figure out what their goals and constraints might be.
To like get inside their head.
Exactly. And then finally they had to formulate a clear negotiation strategy, come up with a plan.
Wow, that's a lot of preparation.
Right. And the chain of thought reasoning part is crucial here because it forces the LLM to actually go through each of these steps in a structured way.
So it's not just like winging it.
Exactly. And this agent, it was incredibly successful.
Really?
Yeah, it had a really high agreement rate. It was in the top percentile for value creation. And it also did really well in terms of claiming value and subjective value.
So it was basically good at everything.
Pretty much, yeah. And the researchers point out that human negotiators are often told to do this kind of thorough preparation, but we often don't have the time or the cognitive capacity to do it properly.
Yeah, that's true.
But AI agents, they don't have those limitations, so they can really implement these best practices in a much more consistent and comprehensive way.
That's a good point.
And it really shows how AI isn't just mimicking human negotiation. It's actually capable of operationalizing these theories in new and potentially even better ways.
Yeah, it's taking things to the next level.
So in their conclusion, the authors really emphasize how this competition was successful at bridging the gap between negotiation theory and AI research.
Mm-hmm.
And they argue that we need to develop this new integrated theory of AI negotiation that combines the best of both worlds.
So taking the insights from human negotiation theory and applying them to AI while also acknowledging the unique capabilities and challenges of AI agents.
Exactly. And it's a call for more research and collaboration between these two fields, which I think is really exciting.
Definitely.
All right, so just to give you a little bit of historical context, the field of negotiation theory has this long and rich history going back decades.
Okay.
And there have been all these amazing thinkers who have contributed to our understanding of negotiation.
Like who?
So you have people like Thomas Schelling, who wrote this really influential book called The Strategy of Conflict.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a classic. And he was really interested in the role of power and threats in negotiation.
I see.
And then you have people like Fisher and Airy who wrote Getting to Yes, which is all about principled negotiation.
Oh, yeah, I've read that one.
So they're more focused on, finding win-win solutions and building relationships. And then more recently, you have scholars like Lax and Sabinius who have been looking at the complexities of real-world negotiations.
Like what kind of complexities?
So, things like multiple parties, asymmetric information, dynamic environments, all that stuff.
Right. It gets messy.
Exactly. And against this backdrop, the emergence of AI agents, particularly LLMs, it's like this really new and significant development.
Like a whole new frontier.
Yeah, it's opening up all these new possibilities for research, and, it's forcing us to rethink some of our assumptions about negotiation.
Yeah, that's exciting.
And I think the comparison to Axelrod's tournaments is really apt here because it shows how structured competition could be this really powerful tool for uncovering fundamental principles.
Right. It's like a controlled experiment.
Exactly.
Okay, so just to recap, some of the key takeaways from this paper.
Okay.
So first of all, we saw that warmth actually matters a lot, even in AI on AI negotiations.
Yeah, it was one of the most surprising findings.
Right. And it seems like the main reason is that warmth helps to build trust and rapport, which makes it easier to reach an agreement.
Exactly.
And dominance, while it can be effective for claiming value, it can also backfire if you're not careful.
Right. You don't want to come across as too aggressive.
Exactly. And then we also saw some really interesting examples of AI-specific negotiation strategies like prompt injection and chain of thought reasoning.
Yeah, and those are really pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with AI.
And I think the big takeaway here is that as AI becomes more integrated into our lives, we need to be really thoughtful about how we design and use these systems.
Especially in contexts like negotiation, where there's so much potential for both benefit and harm.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's move on to our novel notions segment.
Okay.
Where we brainstorm some potential research directions inspired by this paper. So one thing I was thinking about is, what would happen if we had AI agents negotiate repeatedly over time, like in a series of interactions?
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and what if we gave them memory so they could remember their past interactions with each other?
So they could learn from their mistakes and build relationships.
Exactly. And I'm wondering how this would affect the dynamics of warmth and dominance.
Yeah, would they start out being really dominant and then learn to be more warm over time?
Right. Or would it go the other way around?
That's a really cool question.
Yeah, and I think it could have some really interesting implications for things like designing AI for long-term business partnerships or even diplomatic negotiations.
Yeah, totally. Imagine an AI that could learn to be a really effective mediator.
Right. That would be amazing.
Okay, so my novel notion is about using reinforcement learning to cultivate something like AI intuition in negotiation.
Ooh, I like that.
So reinforcement learning is basically where you train an AI agent by giving it rewards for good behavior. And I was thinking, what if we designed a reward function that took into account not just the objective value that the agent gets, but also things like counterpart satisfaction and deal completion rate?
But like a more holistic view of success.
Exactly. And maybe we could even incorporate some measure of warmth and dominance into the reward function.
Oh, that's a really clever idea.
Thanks. And I'm wondering if this would lead to AI agents that are more adaptable and flexible in their negotiation style.
Yeah, it would be like they're developing their own intuition about how to negotiate effectively.
Right. And maybe they would even come up with new strategies that humans haven't thought of before.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of like we're giving them the tools to learn and then stepping back and seeing what they come up with.
I love it.
It's a little bit scary, but also really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so just a reminder, these are just speculative research ideas. We don't know for sure what would happen if we actually tried them.
Right, but it's fun to think about the possibilities.
Yeah.
So I think the main takeaway from this paper is that AI negotiation is this really fascinating and rapidly evolving field.
Yeah, and it's really forcing us to rethink some of our assumptions about what makes a good negotiator.
And it's raising all sorts of ethical questions that we need to be grappling with.
Absolutely.
So for those of you who are interested in learning more, we'll include a link to the full paper in the show notes.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a read.
And if you have any thoughts or questions about this paper or any other machine learning research, feel free to reach out to us.
We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll catch you next time for another deep dive.
Bye.
Bye.